Hello again, gang. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you are listening to this. All right, so for the next couple of lectures, we're going to talk about Britain and the New World. We're going to talk about the background to English exploration. We're going to look at the English settlement of North America. I'll probably do that as one YouTube. Then we'll talk about Bermuda, whether Bermuda was American, question mark, and then talk about from indentured servitude to slavery before finishing off with self-government and the colonies. Just give you guys a little rundown of where we're going today, or whenever you're listening to this. So, the background to English exploration. And feel free to have the PowerPoint up as we go, so you can sort of listen and jot down notes as we're going. Now, the English start a little behind Spain and Portugal with respect to colonization. Britain will start almost a century behind the two main colonizing powers. For Britain, real colonization in the New World starts around 1580. Now, there are three main reasons behind English exploration and colonization. There's going to be economic reasons, there's going to be political reasons, and there's going to be social reasons. So let's talk about them dollar bills. Let's talk about economics. And when we're talking about economics, we're going to talk about one main economic theory. This is the economic theory of mercantilism. 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 Mercantilism is the prime economic theory operating out of Europe between the 15th and the 18th centuries. Mercantilism is the prime economic theory operating out of Europe between the 15th and the 18th centuries. And what mercantilism it's this idea that the various nation states, Britain, France, Spain, Portugal, whichever one you want, they're competing economically against one another. And they're competing on the basis that wealth is a zero-sum game. That is, what a zero-sum game is it means if one person wins, everybody else loses. So think of it as an economic pie. If Mark gets if Mark gets 9 out of 10 pieces of the pie, that means the rest of the class only has one slice of pie for the rest of them. And so these various nation states are competing economically against one another on the basis of the idea that there is a finite, a limited supply of wealth in the world. There's only so much gold, there's only so much silver. And money, wealth, can only be acquired at the expense of someone else. This could be done through discovery. For example, Spain in Mexico and Central America. This could be done through trade, selling goods from one empire to another. Or it could be done through force. The English privateers attacking Spanish trade galleons, for example. So, operating under this theory of mercantilism, if Spain is gaining in wealth, then by default, Great Britain and other countries must be losing in wealth. And so there are three principles with this economic theory of mercantilism. The first one is to maintain a positive balance of trade and payments to increase the kingdom's wealth. What do I mean by a positive balance of trade and payments? Well, simply put, it means you need to export, you need to send out more goods than you bring in. Effectively, it means you sell more than you buy, which makes sense. If you sell $100 worth of stuff and only buy $50 worth of stuff, then you're $50 into profit. I mean, we do this positive balance of payments every month. You need to make sure you make more money than you know that you're going to spend with your bills. So On a nation state level, you need to sell, export more than you buy, more than you import. And this meant that the nation states insisted that the balance of trade remain positive, always make money over the fiscal year. And because there's a limited amount of gold, a limited amount of silver, it's necessary to try to gain or try to hoard as much as possible. The example I typically use is you could think of countries operating under the theory of mercantilism as dragons, as Smaug in in uh, in The Hobbit, or any other mythical dragon that you can think of. Always trying to hoard as much money, as much gold and silver as they can. That's how these countries are trying to operate. So that's the first principle: maintain a positive balance of trade and payments. Sell more than you buy. The second principle is to acquire colonies to benefit the mother country. Colonies will provide raw resources, uh, timber, to go to Britain. Britain takes that timber and transforms it into a chest of drawers, and then they sell it back to the colony for a profit. So colonies provide raw resources and a market for manufactured goods. So maintain positive balance of payments, acquire colonies to benefit the mother country because colonies provide raw resources and markets. But number three is to possess and project international power by having a strong army and strong navy. Strong army and strong navy is necessary to protect the colonies, protect the markets, and to protect the trade routes. If you don't project this power, if you don't show if you're Britain and you're not showing Spain how swole you are, how buff you are, then Spain is going to pick on you. Spain is going to attack your trade routes. So by projecting power, by saying, look how big and bad I am, you're stopping other countries from attacking your trade routes. So economically, the countries are operating under this theory of mercantilism. And the job of the government was to run the country and acquire as much wealth as possible. Wealth equals power. The wealthier that your empire is, the more powerful it is, which meant that the government it was necessary for the government to control the economy to ensure the continued accumulation of wealth. So, for example, manufactured goods would not be necessary to import from someone else. A good example of that today, and I can't believe I'm using a COVID-19 example. A good example of this is manufacturing protective gear. Manufacturing masks, manufacturing tests in Canada means that you don't have to go to the US, you don't have to go to China, you don't have to compete with everybody else who's trying to get these same protective gear or same tests. So the government is in control of the economy to make sure it continues to accumulate wealth. And again, it goes back to exporting, buying, or selling more than you buy. So that's economics. Pure, unadulterated economics. Government controls the economy, operating on this theory of mercantilism. And that's why they went out. That's why Britain went out and colonized, at least from an economic perspective. From a political perspective, well, first and foremost, you have competition with Spain. Because starting in 1513, Spain will start exporting gold and silver from the New World, bringing gold and silver from its colonies in the New World back to Spain. And getting back to the idea of mercantilism, this led the English to believe that Spain was leading in the race to gain or hoard gold and silver. And so this led Queen Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, to authorize English privateers to sail throughout the Atlantic and attack Spanish treasure galleons to take the gold and silver. Now, I mentioned privateers. I didn't say pirates, but I said privateers. There's a difference. A pirate is someone operating without the benefit of a mother country, without support from Spain or Portugal or England. A privateer is simply a pirate that is operating with the assent, with the approval of one of those countries. Now, these English pirates, referred to as privateers because they had official authorization of the English crown, operated between 1560 and 1605. And they were referred to as sea dogs. Arr, matey, sea dogs. The idea being that they're operating in packs. And so each individual dog would go out, and it goes back to this idea of fox hunting. With amongst the English aristocracy, they would go out, they would unleash their dogs on the poor fox, and the fox would be hunted down by various dogs. So this was, in essence, a seaborne version, on a greater level, obviously, of fox hunting. The hounds are being released. Release the hounds. The hounds are being released on the Spanish. And the most famous of these sea dogs was Sir Francis Drake, a favorite of Elizabeth I. In the video game Uncharted, uh, the main character Drake is reported to have been a descendant of Sir Francis Drake. Drake was the second man and the first Englishman to circumnavigate around the world. And Drake will target the Spanish primarily in the Caribbean around what was called the Spanish Main, that is, the coast of Panama. And during one of his more famous raids along the Spanish Main, had Drake capturing 20 tons, and English tons of Spanish gold and silver. So a crap ton of money. Now, the Sea Dogs will figure prominently in the defense of England against the Spanish Armada in 1588. All right, so let us shift our view to the Spanish Armada. This is still dealing with the competition with Spain. Now, in 1588, we have the Spanish Armada, which was the last real threat to Great Britain prior to the 20th century. The last legitimate threat to England before the 20th century will be the Spanish Armada in 1588. Now, the raids on the Spanish by the Sea Dogs, the English privateers, along with Elizabeth's refusal of King Philip of Spain's offer of marriage. Now, Elizabeth will famously have a number of courtiers who want to marry her. Francis Drake was one of them. King Philip of Spain was another. But she will famously, anecdotally say that she is married to the nation, married to the kingdom. And Philip attempted to woo Elizabeth after she first comes to the crown. And Philip and Elizabeth were a little at odds. Elizabeth was Protestant, Philip was Catholic. And Philip was Elizabeth's former brother-in-law. Half brother-in-law, technically, because Philip was married to Elizabeth's half-sister, Queen Mary I. So, a little bit of English history. We have Henry VIII. I'm Henry VIII, I am. Famously had a number of wives. In case you're ever wondering how it goes, the famous poem or stanza is divorce, beheaded, died, divorce, beheaded, survived. So that's how you could tell which wife is which. So he divorced the first one, beheaded the second one, third one died, uh, divorced the fourth, beheaded the fifth, and the last one survived Henry VIII. After Henry VIII died, it went to his oldest surviving child, which was Mary the First. If you ever seen the movie Elizabeth, excellent movie about that period. Mary, very Catholic, marries Philip, bringing Spain and England closer together. Problem for Philip and obviously Mary as well is A, they don't have any children, but B, Mary ends up dying of stomach cancer, which leads Elizabeth, again very Protestant, to the throne. And Philip comes to her and goes, Liz, baby, Liz, honey bunny. I was married to your sister. I'm the big dog on the European continent. Why don't we get married for political reasons? England and Spain together, nobody can stop us. And Liz says no. Philip comes back, proposes again. Liz says no, again, no. And so they are very much adversarial. It also didn't help that English supported rebels to Spanish rule in the Netherlands. And so by the 1580s, Philip had just had enough. He said, and I'm paraphrasing here, he said, I'm going to put that woman on the throne. I'm going to put her in her place. And so by 1588, Spain had been building up a large navy, an armada, throughout the 1580s. And so by 1588, Spain was ready to invade England. And so Spain attempted to invade England, but was thwarted, but was stopped by the smaller but more maneuverable English navy. So the English navy was smaller, but they had more maneuverable ships. Their cannons were able to shoot a little further. And the English navy was led by Sir Francis Drake. They were led by Sir Martin Frobisher. They were led by other sea dogs, captains and admirals who had experience fighting against the Spanish navy. And so they knew the Spanish tricks, they knew the Spanish strategies, so they were able to devise strategies and tactics of their own, including the use of fire, Fire, fire ships, where basically one man was left on the ship with a life raft. The ship was covered with tar and other flammable material, and it was pointed towards a group of Spanish ships and basically lit on fire. The guy on the ship would make sure it stayed pointed to the Spanish fleet until the last second. Then he would bugger off into the lifeboat and get the hell out of there. And basically, I don't know about you, but if I was a captain of a ship and I saw a ship on fire heading straight towards me, that could potentially put my own ship on fire, I would get out of the way. And that's what many ships in the Spanish fleet would do. They would scatter, which would allow the English to effectively pick off the Spanish Navy one by one by one. It also helped that they were thwarted, stopped by Mother Nature. Storms in the English Channel forced some of the ships to go different directions, so the Spanish were never able to marshal their whole forces. Which meant by 1588, England was in a position where it could start looking at attempting to colonize. And so the English turned their view to North America. So the English will turn their view towards North America. And so we're going to start talking about the English settlement of North America. And there's going to be two phases of English settlement in North America. There's going to be the pre-1640 phase. We've seen a little bit about that when we talked about the Powhatan and the English in Jamestown. And then a post-1660 phase. Now, why are those years important? Why 1640 and 1660? Well, in 1640 we have the English Civil War, and in 1642 the crown is basically removed from power, and in 1660 the crown is restored to power. So we have a period 1640 to 1660 roughly, where England is controlled by Oliver Cromwell and Parliament. We are just going to focus on the pre-1640 colonies. Now, pre-1640, the two main colonies founded during this phase is going to be the Virginia colony and the New England colony. Both were initially joint stock companies before they revert to royal colonies after 1660. Now, what a joint stock colony is it's a colony that is funded, a colony that is financed, not only from the crown, but also from private investors. So it's a joint public-private venture. And the reason for this is colonies were risky. There have been a number of examples where a colony would be attempted to be implanted somewhere, and for a variety of reasons, starvation, poor location, bad relationship with the indigenous population, the colony is effectively wiped out or forced to retreat. So this is a very risky investment. So by having not only public money with the crown, but also private money, you're mitigating, you're spreading that risk around, so that you won't put one person or one country into default. Now we're going to look at Virginia first. Virginia is the first of the two colonies, so we're going to look chronologically. So we're going to look at them first. Now, Virginia was formed around the settlement of Jamestown starting in 1607. So Jamestown will be the kernel around which the colony of Virginia will grow. The Virginia colony was more capitalistic and closer in economic character to the British colonies in the Caribbean. They were closer to Jamaica. They were closer to Bermuda in economic character, even though they're further away than they were to New England. They were closer to New England, but economically they were almost a world apart. Virginia focused on commercial agriculture based around tobacco. And tobacco allows Virginia to become more profitable and makes the colony more attractive to settlement. Hey, I can make money in Virginia, so I'm going to move there. I'm going to get my own piece of land, grow a lot of tobacco, and make a lot of money. That's the thinking. And the Virginia colony helped with that thinking, with their use of the head-right system, HEADRIGHT system, the head-right system. The head-right system was a system of land distribution set up by the Virginia Company, provided that the people agree to work in tobacco. So the Virginia Company distributed 50 acres of land to every head of household, plus 50 acres per adult in the household. So if I had a family of three kids and my wife, so there's 5 of us, and my oldest son just turned 18 as we were on the trip over, I would be given 150 acres of land. I would personally be given 50 acres of land, plus 50 acres for my wife, plus 50 acres for my adult son. So I'd be given 150 acres of land. That provides incentives for people to come over with families, if they could, or to bring as many people as they can so they get more land. Now, if you come over as an individual, If you're single and ready to mingle, you go over and say, "Hey, I'm Mark. I'm single. I'm here. Please give me some land." You would be granted 100 acres of land as an individual. Now, there are some problems with the head right system because the desire for land on which to grow tobacco, because tobacco is a very land intensive crop. The desire for land to grow tobacco led to more and more and more English encroachment and expansion into indigenous territory by the settlers. And we saw how the Powhatans attempted to deal with this encroachment. We had the Indian Massacre of 1622. We had another attempt in the 1640s. Opechancanough wanted the English, based on their encroachment, to get off their land or at least stay where they are. So Virginia, early on, very capitalistic in nature. Now let's talk about some characteristics of the emerging Virginia society. We're going to talk about characteristics of the New England society, but let's talk about characteristics of the emerging Virginia society first. And because of tobacco, you find a very dispersed settlement pattern. You don't have a lot of people living in close contact with each other. And the head right system helps with that. You're giving people acreages, so they are very dispersed in their settlement pattern. Because the large plantation style farms required to grow tobacco, you need these large plantations in order for it to really be profitable. So we have a dispersed settlement pattern. With respect to government, we have what was called the House of Burgesses, Burgesses. The House of Burgesses, introduced in 1619, and brought in some local self-government to the Virginia colony. It gave some colonists a say in government, provided that you met the voting requirements. And I emphasize some, because you have, based on the voting requirements, you have a number of people eligible to vote, but not everybody. The voting requirements were threefold. You had to be white, you had to be male, and you had to own property. If you met those three requirements, you were eligible to vote. But this was limited self-government under crown control. The government is appointed by the king with some input by the House of Burgesses. And it meant that the ownership of land required in order to be part of the political mainstream. So in my example with the head right system, my adult son goes off on his own, goes to the city. He doesn't own any property. He's white, male, but not a landholder. Therefore, he cannot be part of the political mainstream until he actually gets some property. So we have a limited self-government. The governor is still appointed by the king. And we have limited franchise, a limited amount of people who can vote. What we find in this Virginia society is an aristocratic society. It is a layered society where land equals power. And the growing influx of population, more and more people going to Virginia to seek out their fortune, leads to a rise in land prices. You have more potential buyers, means it's a seller's market. The seller can decide what the price is. On the other side, if it's a buyer's market, if you have more sellers than buyers, the price is going to go down. So in this case, you have more buyers than you do sellers, so land prices go up. And so this pushes newly freed servants or people coming into the colony further and further and further away from the center of Jamestown, which leads to the rise of an underclass. And what I mean by this is you have a lot of squatters, a lot of people who go out and go, well, nobody's owning this land, I'm just going to squat here. And I don't legally own the land, but I'm going to work it. Which means you have a quarter of the total population as this underclass by 1676. So very aristocratic society, a very layered society, very top-down society on the local level. And the Church of England, the Anglican Church, is the established church. That is, it is a state-sponsored religion with taxes going to support the church. So those are some of the main characteristics I want to emphasize with respect to the Virginia colony. Now let's look at the Massachusetts Bay Colony, or New England. Founded in 1629, so we're looking at about 22 years after Jamestown. Massachusetts Bay initially had an easier time of it than Virginia did. You had less disease in New England. Most of the migration, up to 70% of all migration to Massachusetts Bay, occurred with families rather than individuals. And what you have is you have a direct transplantation of English society to New England. What I mean by this is you have whole neighborhoods, whole communities, basically picking up roots in England and transplanting themselves in New England. So, unlike Virginia, where you have either a very upper class migration or a very lower class migration with no in between, New England was a predominantly middle class migration. And so let's look at some of the characteristics of New England society. Well, whereas Virginia was very much a cash crop centered society, New England focused on subsistence agriculture, that is, grow enough for your families. Most families owned their land and worked the land with family labor. So think of family farms today. Shelby, I'm going to single you out here, mostly because I know you have a family farm. See, I can single people out even virtually. I apologize, but I mean it's like your own family farm. So I mean, whenever you're done with your schooling, I'm sure you probably will be expected to start working some aspect of the farm. So the focus is on subsistence agriculture because you have a short growing season. I mean, think of the growing season in Saskatchewan, very similar to what we have in New England. But you do have an increasingly specialization over time. Once people can get enough to feed themselves, that's when they start specializing. So if we're talking in Virginia about a very dispersed settlement pattern, in New England it is very much a town-centered colony because a town is going to control the land. It's going to be a very communal style living. The town decides which way they're going to expand. The town decides who's going to get which land. The town is seen as a concrete whole, so it's a very close-knit community. And there are established leaders within the town, and any town business is dealt with through town meetings. The entirety of the town come together and discuss town business. The town leadership is elected by the town, but the goal of these town meetings was to create consensus. And it's this idea that citizens had duties to the town and vice versa. The town had duties to the citizen. Now, what we're going to have in New England is, while you have, again, widespread movement in Virginia, a very dispersed settlement pattern. New England is going to engage in what historians have referred to as hiving out. If you are familiar with any beekeeping, I'm sure nobody is. But in order to create a new hive, what you do is you carve out a chunk of the existing hive, you take a queen bee and grow a new hive out of that chunk. That's called hiving out. And so this is what you have in New England, where once the population limit for a town is reached, uh, and they decide this by, oh crap, we can't feed everybody in the town anymore. The town comes together, and part of the population is can either volunteer or be voluntold to be sent out from major cities and form a new settlement. And so the New England colonies tried to regulate land sales to maintain peace with neighboring tribes, to maintain commercial and colonial relations, not always successfully, but through hiving out. Basically, they're taking this idea of transplanting their own society from England to New England, and now they're transplanting and taking whole neighborhoods, whole communities, and starting to set up a new one. It's very much similar to if you think into the way back time, in the way before time, back in January when we were talking about Tiwanaku. It's very much how they set up their own colonies. And so a new town will grow up around this section of community. So we talked about the economy, we talked about the dispersal, the settlement patterns. So let's talk a little bit more about the politics of New England society. Now, actually, we're going to kibosh that. And I know I could figure out how to edit this, but screw it, we'll do it live. We're going to talk about the church first, because the church is at the center of every town, and towns were the center of the colony. Now, the church was very much what we would refer to as a Puritan church. What I mean by this is this goes back to Henry VIII. It all goes back to Henry VIII, one way or the other. Now, Henry VIII wanted to divorce his first wife, and the Roman Catholic Church said, nah, you're not going to divorce her. And so Henry VIII said, okay, screw you, I'm going to create my own church, hence the Church of England. This is going to be a separate church away from the Roman Catholic Church, although if you look at if you've ever been to an Anglican service, especially a high Anglican service, it's very much ritual based. Now, there are small dissenting groups in England who said the Church of England was still corrupted by the Roman Catholic Church. It wasn't pure enough. And so these dissenting groups, these Puritans, initially tried to change the church from within, but they were going, well, if we're in the church, we might get corrupted too. So they decided, okay, we're going to remove ourselves, separate ourselves from the Church of England, which we already are, but we're going to physically separate ourselves, and we're going to go to the Netherlands, and we're going to show the Church of England this is how a pure church should go. And then these Puritans said, okay, this isn't working, so we're going to go to the New World, and these are the people who will end up settling New England. And so they are very much of this idea that the church is at the center of everything. They want a church that meets the biblical standards. And so they want a church that is pure and will serve as an example for England and other Protestants elsewhere. The church was supported by taxation of the colony. So this was an established church. And it was required that everyone had to attend the church. There was little by way of church icons. There was no liturgy. There was no liturgy, no real ritual within the church. If the Spirit moved you and you were male, you could stand up and start speaking. But the centerpiece of the church was the minister and the sermon. Every Sunday, The minister would go, everybody in the town would go to the church to hear the minister give his sermon. And then again, if the Spirit moved you, you could start talking about religion in your own life. Now, the reason I wanted to talk about the church first and how the church is at the center of every town, the town at the center of the colony, was because the structure of the politics. The government was open to all male church members, whereas in Virginia, you had to be white, male, and landholder. In New England, you had to be white, male, and a member of the church. And, well, you couldn't just sign up. You couldn't just go to the local church and go, hey, I want to be a member of the church. These Puritans were very Calvinistic in their beliefs, which meant they weighed heavy the idea of predestination, the idea that God had already chosen who's going to be saved and who's not. And so, in order to be a member of the church, you had to be a member of the elect. You had to already have been preordained to be saved. Now, wait, Mark, you ask. How do you know if you're saved if you're still alive? Well, that's a good question. The Puritans believed that if God bestows his blessings on you, that's an indication that you're saved. If you are smart, if you're rich, if you're good looking, then God has bestowed the blessings on you, therefore you're a member of the elect. Now, the problem with this position of elect is it's not, it can't get passed down. You could be saved, nobody else in your family may be saved, but you could be saved. So that means the amount of members can be or is static. But you have more and more and more people coming into the colony. Your children are starting to grow up. And so they come up with this idea of a halfway covenant, this halfway agreement, where if you can show that you're doing good for the society, or that you can show some connection in the past to a member of the elect, then you could become a church member. So the structure of the polity is it's open to all male church members. And for the colony, you have a elected governor, an elected body of magistrates, that is an elected body of judges, and an elected body of deputies. So the deputies would be elected from the towns, they would come together and help make the decisions for the government. So we have a large amount of self-government. This is still not a democracy, because even with the halfway covenant, society is still split between church members and non-church members. And society was run on what they believed to be God's will, i.e., the Bible. And so you find the regulation of moral behavior by the state. They believed that worldly goods were good, but not in excess. You can't have too much of a good thing. And they take this idea of covenant really seriously. So in the Old Testament, you have this covenant between God and his chosen people, the Jews. The church believes that they have a covenant with God. They're not the first chosen people, but they are a chosen people. And so they see the family as a mini covenant. The family has a covenant, has an agreement with the town has an agreement with the church. All right, so we are going to stop talking about New England and Virginia here, North America here. We're going to shift our view in the next lecture to looking at Bermuda. And Bermuda is an interesting colony because it's not exactly part of the Caribbean, but it's also not exactly part of North America. That's why I have it Bermuda as American, question mark. All right, I will talk to you guys and talk at you guys in a bit.